Hello, everyone. Welcome to this episode of Modern Faith. My name is Ian Goimer. If you haven't met me, I am the Duke intern here for the summer. Today, we're going to be speaking with Noah Glover. Noah is a buddy of mine from undergrad. We went to Birmingham Southern College with one another. We were both religion majors, and we were both in the same program for students discerning a call to ministry. So we got to know each other pretty well, and now we're both here at Duke with one another. He's going into his third year, and he is actually serving Mount Bethel in Bahama, North Carolina, I believe. So we'll be talking with him about God the Gardener. I hope you all enjoy. Remember to hit like and subscribe to keep up with the Modern Faith series, and that way it'll notify you anytime a new video is released. Hope y'all enjoy this conversation. Hello, everyone. We have with us this week Noah Glover. Noah is a buddy of mine from undergrad. He's from Wheeler, Mississippi. We also go to Duke Divinity together, and so we've known each other for a while now. But yeah, today he's going to talk to us about God the Gardener. When we were in undergrad, we took a class called Religion in the Natural World. And in that class, we were assigned an article by a Duke professor, Norman Worsba, called God the Gardener. And I remember that before class every week, we would meet together and talk about whatever readings we had for the week. And this particular week, we were talking about God the Gardener, and we both were just really kind of impressed with the article, impressed with the theological reflection that it had, and just kind of the questions that triggered for us. So I remember us both being really excited to get into class and talk about it, and it's stuck with us ever since. And that's been probably 5, 6 years ago now. So excited to talk about it with you all, and I'm glad to have Noah here with us today.
Thank you for letting me be here, Ian. And while I got the air, y'all take care of Ian. He's a wonderful fella and a great dude.
Well, let's get started with the question: what does the metaphor God the Gardener mean?
Well, if you look at Hebrew scriptures, the Old Testament, you'll find a lot of agricultural themed text. And because ancient Israel was an agricultural community. And if you look at the second creation story that is found in the chapter of Genesis, you'll see a God that is much like a gardener. In this creation story, God does not simply speak everything into existence, but rather God gets a little more hands on and actually does something. God gets down on, I guess you can say, his hands and knees in a sense, and starts to form Adam with his hands out of the dirt of the earth. And so he's kind of, tilling the earth a little bit and getting the crops ready to grow, I guess you could say. But in that, it was just a more intimate and more desirable, I think, God, a God that's more up close.
So my next question is more specifically about for you. When we talk about God the Gardener, the concept of God the Gardener, how does that speak to you? How has that kind of just affected the way that you think of God in your day-to-day life? Um, yeah, I know that your sister does some farming, so that could be an interesting thing to tie in there.
Yeah, so I come from, like he said, a small town called Wheeler, Mississippi. We have population of, I don't know, 500 or something. But in our community, it's a big agricultural community, just like ancient Israel, I guess you could say. And for me, to have a God that is easy to understand or easier to understand is very important. If we have these metaphors for God that I can't grapple with, if I can't understand, then I won't be able to grow in a relationship with God. And so when I read this article, I was amazed because this is a God that is hands on. It's not a God that's far away. It's not a God that is removed from our situation, but it's a God that took the time to stop and to, to get around and to get dirty in the dirt. This is a God that loved us so much that he was willing to get nasty. And coming from an agricultural spot, everybody has a garden. My grandparents have a garden. My older sister has a organic farm that she's starting right now to provide fresh produce for underprivileged families in my community. And when I think of this gardening God, it just hits home because God is providing us life. What does a garden give you? It gives you good fruit, it gives you good vegetables and things to eat. And so, therefore, when God is in our garden of our lives, God is cultivating good fruit, good crops. I guess you can say even fruits of the Spirit. that God is taking time to nurture us, to be with us one on one, one on one.
Yeah, I really like that attention to God being intentional, God being hands-on with creation. I'm just reminded of in Worsb's article when he's talking about how after God has created and God takes the time to appreciate all of creation and say that it is good, God also calls um, Adam to go and to take care of the garden, to take care of all of the crops, and to take care of all the animals and all of creation. Um, and just to see that it lives up to its potential, that is cared for the way that God cares for us. And I think that speaks to the interconnectedness of everything, that we are called to take care of things that give back to us and to just really live into that and that calling that God gives to us.
And also the continuation of creation. You know, God kind of put it on our shoulders. You got to continue this good work. Yeah, we were kind of pushed out of the garden, but that's it for another day. But just the fact that we are continuing the creation that God initially started, that we are a part of this divine endeavor, I guess you could say.
It reminds me, there's a pastor of mine from one of my churches that I served in undergrad who does this piece on, and he's talking about the story, the creation story. And he gets into how after everything that God creates, God is saying, and it's good. God is affirming the goodness of the things God's creating. He gets around to creating Adam and creating Eve, and afterwards God doesn't necessarily say that it is good, but leaves it open. And he talks about how that openness leaves it up to us to determine whether or not that is good. And so that's kind of like our role in this, and that we are living into that continued story of creation, that we will define whether or not we ourselves are good. I just think that's a really interesting point.
Yeah, and it's powerful. And we have to continue to make sure that we create a good creation and not something that's, a bad crop.
Right. So another thing that I think is really interesting to think about and to talk about, I know for our field education class, we've been talking a good bit about food insecurity. Um, and especially, I think that that's a big topic in our world right now. And as noted in North Carolina, it's a really big thing. And there are areas where food insecurity is really a big need. So I guess I'm just wondering how this kind of metaphor of God the gardener might help us to better understand from a theological lens how to address food insecurity, how to think about food insecurity.
Yeah, this is a difficult question because we always hear that the world has enough for everybody. We have enough resources for everybody to have something, but our greed makes it where we don't share and people are hungry. And so when I think about God the gardener, I think it's more of a call for us to, like we were talking about, continuing on the good creation. Uh, I like to also think about the Jesus in chapter 20, the Gospel of John. Mary thinks that Jesus is a gardener after he's been resurrected. She's in the garden and she goes to the empty tomb and she's like, "Oh my goodness, where's he at?" And she turns around, there's this old fellow walking along the way, and she says it's just a little gardener. But then Jesus calls her by name, and she knew instantly, oh, that's not a gardener, that's Jesus. But I think of the beauty of calling Jesus a gardener because through the salvation, through the life, death, and resurrection of Jesus, we are a new creation. And because of this new creation, we are called to share the goodness of this gardener. I mean, that's just something too good you can't share. You can't not share that double negative right there. And so I think when it comes to food insecurity, if we don't understand that God is the gardener of our souls and our hearts, then we won't understand the importance of helping our neighbors.
Hmm.
And so we need to be more in tune with God, the gardener, so that we can be more in tune with the earth, so that we can provide good, healthy food for people, and so we can know what's actually healthy practices. Are we killing the earth because of this thing? Are we hurting individuals because we're not producing healthy food? So just making sure that we can continue on this beautiful creation, that we really boast in the gardener that is Jesus, as our hearts are being cultivated once again.
Yeah, I heard in what you just said that that's something. that Norman Worspa talks about in his article too is that as we eat, we need to take the time to reflect before each meal and before we're eating to think about the processes that go into the food on our plates and the foods that we take in. Think about how that process is played out to get that food to where it is, and think about the good and the bad that comes from that, the harm, but also the fruitfulness that can come from it. And yeah, just taking the time to sit there and really think about that. And we're in such a culture that's go, go, go. So sometimes we forget to just sit back for a moment and to relax and to contemplate the things that we're taking in and that we're feeding our bodies. And also to think about the labor that's gone into it to get it there. Another thing that I think about is the story of Jesus feeding the 5,000 and how afterwards you can just imagine the people being like, oh, wow, you can just create food on demand. Like, let's keep this going. Let's get like all this food. Like, we can make so much food. This could be like, I'm thinking in our world, people would be like, let's make a business out of this. And, Jesus is like, well, it's more about making sure that we're sustaining ourselves, that we're addressing our needs. It's not about food being a commodity. This isn't something that we're trying to just make as much food as we can and exploit that per se, but it's about addressing the need of the situation. And so I think that that can kind of tie into it as well. As we talk about food insecurity, it's not that we need an abundance of food, but if we just see that we can help wherever we can help to address a situation, that the people are getting the sustenance that they need.
And another interesting thing that actually Laura Sisson, Ian, and I, she was a leader of ours in undergrad. She said that what if this miracle? Just think about it in a different way. That the miracle is that Jesus actually got people to share,
Mm,
and I think that goes in beautifully with the God, the gardener, the God that gathers the crops, but does so that He can give everything we
right.
have because of God. So what we ought to give as well. So I think that's just an interesting way to think about it too.
We only have time for about one more question. So I'd like to just end on the question of what is something that we can take away from this idea of God the gardener? What is something that you have taken away and that as you go throughout your day to day life, something that just comes up for you that you are able to hold on to?
Well, the best thing about God the Gardener is that this God is practical. I'm at Duke Divinity where there's nothing but theological language that goes in one ear and out the other. It's this highfalutin, high society way of talking about God. But where I come from in rural Mississippi, that doesn't cut it. You know, we got to have a God that we can understand. And I think that's the beauty of this. This is a God that meets us where we are. It meets us in the dirt of our lives and the muckiness of the garden and says that, we are loved and that we are so loved that God would take the time to slow down, dig around in the dirt, and breathe that breath of loving life into our lungs.
Mm, yeah, that's good stuff. Yeah. I think that's a really good point. I think it's really easy for us to get distracted and for us to think that we have to have some super profound thought or that we need to always be pondering these deep, difficult questions when we think about God. And sometimes we put God so far away from us instead of recognizing that God's right there around us, tilling the dirt with his hands, being right there next to us with creation. Yeah. Well, thank you so much, Noah. I appreciated the opportunity to get to have this conversation. I hope that everyone has enjoyed hearing about it. I think that you provide some wonderful insights, and um, yeah, it's just a beautiful story, a beautiful message, and I think a great metaphor for us to think about.
And just thank you for the opportunity to share about the story that I love.
Thank you all for tuning in to this episode of the Modern Faith series. I hope that y'all enjoyed the conversation that we had with Noah and that this topic brings something of value to you all. We will attach the link to the Worspa article to this video so that you can access that if you wish. And just a reminder to like and subscribe so that you will be notified whenever a new video is released and you can keep up with the latest on that. I think that's all for now. Thank you again for watching, and I hope y'all enjoyed. Take care.